let's start with Dortmund. I mean, what was that? I think we both said on the show that we assumed Dortmund would struggle a little bit with Union Berlin, but quietly this Union Berlin side, by the way, they're sitting in sixth, just 3 points behind Bayern and Leverkusen, who were on the top spot. I mean, they had a phenomenal start, a great week for them too when they trying to go forward with the stadium expansion, right? Really firmly keeping them firmly established as a Bundesliga club as they're becoming more and more Berlin's number one. Dortmund go there again, fall behind very quickly 2-0, and we had a couple eager subscribers in the chat say, "Oh, don't watch, they're gonna overturn that." And I just put in the chat like, "Yeah, this isn't Bochum. This is unfortunately a club that knows quite well and has demonstrated under Bo Svensson that they're very good defensively." Union Berlin would concede one, but ultimately held the result and won the game. And I think it was very much a deserved victory too. And yet another example of Nuri Sahin's side just completely ignoring 45 minutes of football.
Yeah, it was an interesting game in the sense that going into it, I think a lot of people certainly kind of framed it as this kind of match that Union Berlin had something to prove themselves in because, Bo Svensson had never beaten Dortmund. They were kind of grinding out results without ultimately winning a lot of them. But I think ultimately it was a game that Dortmund had to prove themselves. And I know it's easy to say in hindsight, but their away record is horrendous. Going back to last season as well, absolutely dreadful. Still haven't won a game away from home in the league this season, so 2 defeats out of 2, I think. Their record against Union Berlin in particular, I think Union Berlin have now won 4 of the last 6 against Dortmund in that fixture. And as you said, it was a game in which Union Berlin looked like the team that were like, yeah, we're here to win this match. We're going to control this game. We're going to create the chances. And you are the plucky underdogs who've come to our ground to try and win this game. And that's exactly how Dortmund played. I thought they looked better in the second half, probably, but they undoubtedly missed, Adeyemi in attack, and it's such a shame that obviously he went out so untimely, I guess, in the sense that he was just really seeming to hit, peak form as we saw him against Celtic in the Champions League. And before that as well. And obviously they brought in Maximilian Bayer, Gittins on the left. And, I did kind of say this, I think I said it on the previous show, but maybe it's something somewhere else I was talking about it. But I'm always quite hesitant to, indulge people when they talk about these super subs and they're clamoring for him to start games. Of course, at Dortmund, there's Duranville and Gittins is obviously another one beforehand. You go back to Bayern Munich and there's Matthias Tell, which obviously Bayern fans are desperate to see play. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that they can be very different roles. A player coming on for the last 20 minutes when there's tired legs and their team are maybe already won the game, so there's not the pressure on them, so they can kind of play with a degree of freedom. It's very different from a player starting and being expected to perform. And that's something that I think Maximilian Bayer and Gittins kind of struggled with, to be honest with you, in this match. And I was kind of watching it thinking Dortmund are really struggling to create chances here. They're really struggling to even kind of dominate Union Berlin in this game. And I kind of came back to this idea, and we've kind of talked about it. It's kind of like a running joke about Dortmund that Dortmund never really seemed to have tactics. It's just vibes, And Nuri Sahin puts out his best 11 and he kind of hopes one of these stars will do something to win the game. And it's kind of worked in bits for them this season, in the sense, obviously, that Adeyemi's just been incredible. Guirassí's had moments where he's been brilliant. Even Julian Brandt as well had a quietly impressive start to the season as well, I would say. But there's no kind of system there where if Adeyemi comes out, you can slot someone else in. Because even if you just kind of consider swapping Adeyemi for Bayer, I know Bayer can play it wide. I know he's quite pacey, but I would say they're actually very different types of players. And I found that move quite bizarre because it ended up being almost like a front two rather than the way that has been in the last kind of couple of games. So I thought Nuri Sahin got his tactics a bit wrong this game. Obviously, the players' performances weren't great. But ultimately, I think Union Berlin were just really impressive, and they've kind of, what I do kind of love about them this season is that Bo Svensson has just kind of blown the dust off the old game plan and said we're going back to basics, and we're going to just play the way Union Berlin played beforehand. They've got so much success. They'll play defensively. They'll get very direct. They'll punt the ball at the park if they have to. They'll chase long balls. And that's what they did time and time again against Dortmund. And it worked for them because that Dortmund defence is much like Bayern's and much like what we're going to talk about a lot on this show, individual players making really stupid mistakes. And that penalty that Nico Schlotterbeck gave away was just criminal in this game. And he's just having such a kind of dreadful start to the season. And yeah, it seems to be something that's dogging all the kind of top 4 or 5 teams right now. Defenders just cannot seem to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, maybe some of them are overplayed. That could be a theme here, and that's maybe a theme also at Bayern, right? I mean, Harry Kane is a great example of that. The top teams all struggling. I mean, didn't the Bundesliga have the most players in the latter stages of the Euros as well, right? They certainly had the most players score the most goals in the Euros, and I think they had the most players in the latter stages. And so, I personally think the quality of the Bundesliga is the best it has been in some time, which also then reflects of lots of players being on international duty and playing even more games. And maybe that is a factor here. Like Schlotterbeck played a lot of games last season, going all the way to Champions League. He's, playing a lot of games again this year. But, that is maybe also a bit too much of an excuse. I think a big part of that is that I still don't know what Nuri Sahin's tactics are. And I would love to find out what would actually happen if Borussia Dortmund signed a coach with a clear tactical philosophy. And in fact, they haven't had a coach like that since Lucien Favre. And I would actually argue that some of the best football that Dortmund played in recent years was that first season under Lucien Favre, right? It then degenerated and fell apart because oftentimes it was too results oriented. There weren't enough goals scored, etc. We had that debate before, how quickly that can go sideways in German football. But I would really love to see what happens if Dortmund would actually sign a coach with a clear understanding of this is what I'm going to do tactically with the squad. I'm going to implement, I don't know, any tactic, whatever it is right now, what you want, but just implement that. And I would love to see what would happen if that was the case, and not give it to yet another guy that's learning on the job.
Yeah, there's a big editorial on Kicker today by Patrick Kleiman on Dortmund, and the headline's basically Dortmund's unpredictability has become predictable. I think that's actually quite a good way of summing up the problems at Dortmund right now.
Yeah,
they go from feast to famine in these performances, and again, you kind of want to give them maybe the coach the benefit of the doubt. He's still trying to figure out his squad. He's still having to make lots of changes from one game to the next. For example, Jan Couto, the right back that they've gone from Manchester City, is the kind of the front picture of this interview or this article, and he's a perfect example of a player who's just been kind of tossed into this game, into this system. And on the one hand, you have to give him time to adapt and learn how to play the Dortmund way, if there's such a thing exists. But on the other hand, it just kind of feels like he's just been thrown into play the way that he's always played his football. No one's given him any instructions. No one's saying, we have at Dortmund, our fullbacks do this, they do that. Here's how you link up with the central midfielders. Here's how you support the fullback or the winger and things like that. It just feels like he's just been tossed in and just said, do what you've always done. We're assuming you're okay at Man City, so presumably you can do it for us as well. And that's kind of the way that all these players seem to be kind of working off these things. Now, of course, Sahin does deserve some credit because some of these players are playing quite well. He has obviously got a really good tune out of Adeyemi. He's doing very well. I thought Girassi, for most of this season so far, maybe this game as an exception, has done very well to kind of adapt. But and of course, who am I thinking of? Goodness me, I forgot him. Pascal Gross, sorry. Has just kind of slotted in as well as if he's always been there. Whether Emre Can's the right kind of central midfielder for him, I'm not quite sure. No. But there are players in this team who are doing well under Sahin, but that defense is still a complete mess. Gregor Kobel, worryingly, I think, is regressing this season. He looks far more nervous, and I don't know if that's just because he's looking at the defenders in front of him playing like Bambi on
I was just
ice
gonna
every
say.
weekend, and it's obviously freaking him out because you can see the nerves in him when Dortmund play right now, which just wasn't there last season, for example. So it would be all well and good if Dortmund were this free scoring team that just outscored their opponents and picked up points every single weekend, but they're not doing enough of that. They're losing games they should be winning, with all the respect to Union Berlin, and it's just not good enough. And it's I mean, I feel bad that we kind of come on the show every week and just kind of bash Dortmund. It's not really what Dortmund fans want to hear, I'm sure, but I'm struggling. We're struggling to see what the issues are because there's no clear tactics. It's not like with Company where we can be like, well, we know what he's doing and here's the shortfalls to what he's doing. Let's see if he fixes those things.
Yeah.
With Dortmund and Nuri Sahin, we just do not know what he's trying to do. And we've been saying that now for like, what, 8 or 9 weeks now.
I mean, like there is shortcomings with any company as well, but it's clearly that he has a strong philosophy. There's there is something that he stands for. Bayern Munich signed him. I know he wasn't the number one choice, but they ultimately signed him because they knew what they were getting. There was a clear track record of a tactical system that he was going to play, for better or worse. Right now it's for worse, but they will know what they were getting and they were buying into that. And I think that's actually okay. I'm okay with that, because in the end of the day, that's a process, and you're sticking to something, and you're standing for something. And Bayern Munich have always signed coaches that stood for that sort of football, and they went out and got someone with that profile. I cannot say the same thing about Borussia Dortmund. I was thinking that today because I saw the Brighton result. Fabian Hürzeler. Oh boy, it's too bad he wasn't available last summer to be signed as a head coach, Stefan?
Oh, yeah. Hey, look, there's... Yeah. Or Sebastian Hoeneß, who taught them a very valuable lesson a couple of weeks ago. I mean, it's an interesting discussion because we've seen now, I mean, I think this is now the 6th head coach, maybe more, that Dortmund have had since Klopp left. In fact, I can tell you very quickly because I'm on this fantastic website called Transfermarkt.
I wonder if I can do it. Hold on. Let me see if I can do it without the Transfermarkt help.
Okay, do you want to try and do them in order?
There was first a Dutch guy, Peter Bosch.
No, before him. Him.
First it was Tuchel, then it was Peter Bosch, then it was Lucien Favre, Peter Stöger.
No, Stöger was first, and then Favre.
Okay, Stöger, then Favre, then came Marco Rose. No, there was someone in between. No, there wasn't. Okay, Marco Rose.
Yeah.
And then they fired Marco Rose out of nowhere. Edin Terzic, right?
Yes.
Oh, Edin Terzic was briefly in between Rose and...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I forgot the first Terzic guy.
If we're only counting Terzic once, Sahin is now the 7th head coach since Klopp. And
I think we have to count Terzic twice, though. Because they were 2 separate roles.
Yeah.
And it was a full year in between.
Yeah, he coached for about 200 days in the first 30 games. So, you're right. That probably is a stint. It's more than Peter Stöger had, for example. So, and Peter Bosch. So, actually, we should count it. Okay, so, so how many, we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is their 8th managerial appointment since Klopp. And, you could definitely say performances have varied and success has varied, but for the most part, none of them have really worked out. And
I was saying this in the group. I thought Favre.
And I mean, hey, look, and I thought Tuchel did a great job before he left. So I wouldn't really say he was a failure. And I liked Marco Rose, for example. I thought he might have been on something, but at what point? I mean, I'll say this, and this is the kind of really frustrating thing for our Dortmund fans, I think, is that we've got to this point now where why would you have any faith in the club to actually go out and sign a proper head coach? When you look at that track record, they have been proactive in the past. Of course, they got Thomas Tuchel. They fell out with him. Marco Rose was probably a really smart signing, up-and-coming head coach. Okay, he fell out with Gladbach fans. They weren't too happy with him, but he was an exciting young head coach. They fell out with him as well. So this is the problem with Dortmund. Whenever they actually do bring in ambitious young head coach, they tend to fall out with him. I'm assuming
Yeah.
because these head coaches walk in the door and say, we need to improve things dramatically here, and they start shaking things up, and, the club don't like it. But
yeah.
It's up to Sahin, and I've said this over and over again already this season, it's up to Sahin to prove to us that he's good enough to be a Dortmund head coach and not just another yes man for Vatska and his hand-picked successor to actually push his club forward and not just say, yeah, try getting top four, that'd be great. Don't bother yourself with anything else. Don't worry about trying to win trophies or doing something in Europe. Just get top four. We'll pay the bills. We'll sell a few young players, and we'll keep going again next season. That just seems to be the extent of Dortmund's ambition. And I've yet to see anything from Sahin to suggest that he's going to go beyond that.
I mean, even Terzic fell out with eventually, right? The moment he went against the stream, and that is telling. And the fish always smells from the head. The fish riecht vom Kopf. That's stinkt vom Kopf is the old German saying here. And that's telling. Yeah, it rots from the head, right? That's the other translation. In German, it's the fish stinkt vom Kopf. So, yeah, I mean that's I think enough said.
But we don't have time to go into a Dortmund rabbit hole because we could spend all night talking about this.
Oh no, we can't because we can't because we also have to talk about Leverkusen and the fact that they threw away a 2-0 lead against Holstein Kiel.